What is it about the relationship between mining companies that extract minerals at a profit but employ people at the same time that for you is rather unholy? What's wrong in that relationship?
Well, I wouldn't call it unholy. I would call it completely unfair in terms of recognising the labour and the conditions that mining companies affect on communities and how they compensate communities for being there for the extraction. Is that done in a fair and just way? And so those are the issues really that we look at across the region. For instance, in South Africa, it's really around historic mining in gold. And although Anglo's not now in gold and it's selling off De Beers into a new company, it still has historic legacies that it has not addressed. So we're looking at, with local partners, what still remains to be done for a fair and just share of the mineral wealth that's been taken out of South Africa.
Well, perhaps tell us, what is it that remains to be done?
That's a lot. How much time do your listeners have? Let's look at two particular communities or two particular issues. So one are the mines that were gold miners, were gold mines. They had a million or more gold miners across the region, are still waiting for compensation from 6 companies that settled with something called the Tshiamiso Trust, rather than go to a class action for the damage that had incurred on miners' lungs for TB and silicosis over decades. So at the moment, Tshiamiso Trust had their AGM a couple of weeks ago. They were talking about how hard it is to find the beneficiaries and how they've only been able to pay 24,000 people out of what we estimate is more than 500,000 miners or former miners and their families who have died and yet not had compensation, or who are living very painful lives. Silicosis is a very, very, very painful way
and is this targeted or angled to Anglo American specifically, or is this an indictment the way you see it on mining houses in general? Of course, Anglo American is a major player in that. I get it.
Well, Anglo American sets itself up to be a kind of mining company of the future. And so in that sense, we are looking very seriously about what have they done and what will they continue to do to clean up the legacies of the mining issues in South Africa. And Makua, one of the movements in South Africa, is also dealing with this in terms of how mining affected communities today get to specify, what is a fair recognition of the impact on their communities and what is a fair recognition for the share of profit, if you like, that's coming out of their land and impacting on their communities. Justice for Miners is another organisation, an NGO working across the region, not just in South Africa, where those miners who came from Swaziland and Lesotho and Zimbabwe, Lesotho, across the range of Botswana, where those miners were sent back home with TB and silicosis from all of the mining companies because they were unfit for work and yet they were not properly compensated. And the Tshiamiso Trust is just the very latest one of these. That settlement was in 2018, and here we are 5 years later, 24,000 people have had compensation. It's just not good enough. The mining companies say, oh, well, we set up this independent trust and the court set this amount and this process. But actually, when you dig down deep, you'll find there are massive unfairnesses and injustices built into how decisions are made. For instance, there are government-issued certificates for people who had TB, and those are not being recognised by the Tshiamiso Trust. They're making very ill people, or people who've already died, are unable to get those compensations for their family, and people who are very ill still have to travel to get yet more certificates, more x-rays to please yet another institution. Whereas when the judge made that call in Pretoria, made that judgment, he said the trustees of the Tshiamiso Trust need to be paying out. Their whole approach needs to be making sure that it's paid out fairly to people rather than inhibiting.
All right.
In Zambia, similar issue. So Anglo American in Zambia, owned a mine there, a lead contamination between 1928 and 1974. It's a serious issue now. 140,000 people are seeking to take them to a class action in Johannesburg.
We'll certainly invite Anglo American to come and give their side of the story maybe tomorrow. But for now, let me bring in